Welcome back to the Crypt Door podcast, where we step quietly through the cemetery gates and sometimes kick them open to uncover the stories buried just beneath the surface. And today, we're exploring one of the darkest and most disturbing scandals in American funeral history. And let me tell you guys, this one's a doozy. This is a story of David Sconce, a man who weaponized the trust placed in the mortuary profession, turning human remains into a business built on deception, desecration, and greed. This is a story of unethical mass cremations, organ harvesting, etc. Now, this is the best information I was able to gather from various sources, so take it as you will. Over the next while, we'll walk through the rise and fall of Sconce's operation, the lives affected, and the chilling aftermath that still haunts hundreds of families to this day. What happened in Southern California in the 1980s wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And worse yet, it was hidden until it wasn't. Pasadena, California. Clean streets, church bells on Sundays, the kind of place where people know the local funeral director by name. That director was Gerald Sconce, owner of Lamb Funeral Home, along with his wife, Lorianne. For years, the Sconces were respected, known for offering affordable and dignified services, especially to the elderly and church-going community. But in the 1980s, their son David stepped in. David wasn't interested in tradition. He was interested in volume, margins, and profit. He had a plan, a new business, Cremation Services Incorporated. It would do wholesale cremation for other funeral homes, fast, cheap, no questions asked. Soon, funeral homes across Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties were signing contracts with David Sconce. And they had no idea David was doing mass cremations to maximize profits. The more he does, the more money he makes. Simple as that. In David's first year, cremations surged from 194 to over 1,600. By 1985, that number skyrocketed to 8,000. In early 1987, a fire broke out at the Lamb Funeral Home's crematorium in Pasadena while it was overloaded with multiple bodies. Reports indicate up to 38 bodies have been packed into ovens at once. The blaze, triggered by the mass cremation setup, destroyed the facility and everything around it. Sconce found a location in Hesperia, California, a desert town north of LA. Not exactly a business hub, but that was the point. Fewer eyes. In the back of a strip mall behind a carpet store, he set up a crematorium with minimal permitting and virtually no oversight. Inside, he had one retort, a high-temperature oven designed to cremate one body at a time. But David didn't follow that rule. Here's what one former employee later told investigators. We'd stack them 3, 4, sometimes 10 or more, as long as they fit. We burned them all at once. The smell, it got into your clothes and into your skin. The process left behind ashes that couldn't be identified. That didn't matter to Sconce. He'd scoop random remains into urns or not at all. Some families received cement powder or chimney soot. Others received nothing. And still the business kept growing. By 1987, Cremation Services Incorporated was cremating hundreds of bodies per month, but Sconce's operation was falling apart under its own weight. The retort couldn't keep up, the staff was overwhelmed, and the worst part, they started hiding bodies. Officials were alerted to noxious black smoke coming from a building and smelling of burning human flesh. The assistant Hesperia fire chief reported the caller said, "Don't tell me they're not burning bodies. I was at the ovens at Auschwitz." Upon entering, officials found several hundreds of pounds of human remains at the site. Investigators later discovered corpses stuffed in ceiling tiles. Others were found behind the building wrapped in plastic and left to decay. And then came one day, a rival funeral director reported suspicious behavior. He'd received ashes with metal dental implants from multiple people. The math didn't add up. He called the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. That one phone call would crack the case wide open. In May 1987, a multi-agency task force raided the Hesperia crematorium. They found multiple bodies in ceilings and walls, ashes and bone fragments from dozens of unidentified individuals, a logbook that didn't match the number of bodies found, and a cremation chamber that showed signs of being run nonstop for days. Worse still, Hundreds of urns had already been delivered to families, on top of which they had been discovered to be organ harvesting for profit. The damage was irreversible, and then came the twist. While under investigation, David Sconce made another critical mistake. Authorities tapped his phone and caught him trying to hire a hitman to silence a rival funeral director who'd spoken out about his practices. David Sconce had reportedly said, "He needs to shut up. I don't care how. Break his legs or bury him. I've got the cash." That recording became a key part of the case. Sconce was arrested shortly after, and a full investigation into his empire began. The charges started stacking up fast. Embezzlement, operating an illegal crematory, illegal disposal of human remains, grand theft, fraud, and solicitation of murder. David Sconce pled guilty to multiple felonies. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, a sentence many consider shockingly light. His parents, Gerald and Lorianne, were also convicted. They lost their licenses and quickly faded from the industry. The California funeral industry was shaken to its core. Over 200 families were impacted. Many never found out what really happened to their loved ones. Some received ashes that didn't belong to them. Some received none at all. Regulatory agencies passed new laws increasing oversight and inspections of facilities. But for those families, it was a little too late. A victim's family member had said, "You put your trust in these people. You believe your mother, your father, your sister is being treated with dignity, but instead they were just thrown into a pile." Today, the name David Sconce is infamous in mortuary circles. His case is taught in ethics courses and used as an example of what happens when profit comes before people. He was banned for life from working in the funeral industry. But his story raises a haunting question. How much trust do we place in the people who handle our dead? And what happens when that trust is broken? It was also reported that David was organ harvesting for profit and taking gold teeth out of the deceased to resell the gold. I'm watching an HBO documentary series called The Mortician about this subject, and they do have interviews with David Sconce, former employees, and they're talking about what happened. Very interesting viewing. Very, very interesting, guys. If you have HBO, I recommend it. The show is interesting and very shocking. I remember hearing about this story years ago, and I found it very shocking, and I find it very disturbing in the HBO documentary about how David Sconce was kind of nonchalant about what he did. It was all just a business to him, making money. He was quoted saying, "Love them while they're here." And he also spent a lot of time downplaying stuff and trying to rationalize the things that he did. Let me know in the comment box your thoughts on this. Well, guys, that concludes this episode of the Crypt podcast. If you found today's story important or disturbing, and you probably did, please consider rating the show or sharing it with someone who hasn't heard this story before. Because the truth, when it comes to death, is often buried until someone digs it up. And remember, the dead have stories too. You just have to know where to listen. Well, guys, that was very, very shocking. And also that when they were taking the gold, the gold teeth out of the deceased, they called it popping chops, which was just like, wow, it was very, very shocking. And the documentary also goes on to talk more about David after all this happened. And basically, he, gotten other jobs and done other things in his life, but then he seemed to always be getting in trouble with the law over and over and over, I was just like, wow, this guy just can't seem to keep his nose clean at all. He's always doing something. And a lot of my mom's side of the family is for cremation. My mom, her mom and dad, her aunt, myself, I'm also for cremation. I don't believe in, being put in a coffin, pumped full of fluids and have people gawk at you, I personally, when I have to attend a funeral, like on my dad's side of the family, they're about the caskets. And even though my dad was cremated, a lot of the people on his side of the family are about, the whole casket, the whole funeral, the whole thing, the viewing, everything. And I really hate going to those because the people that you love, when you see them in the casket, they don't look the same. Of course, they're deceased and they're been prepared and everything. But I would rather not have to see that as my last like sight of them, and just remember them as they were when they were living. But there is, I went on a tangent here, sorry, but there is, a lot of deception and a lot of shady practices in the funeral industry. I am very confident that the good outweigh the bad in the funeral industry. I do believe there's a lot of good people out there doing the right thing by the families they are servicing. But in cases like this, there's things that are just happening and happening for profit. And David Sconce, man, and it was funny. David Sconce, when they were talking about the gold, taking the gold, harvesting the gold teeth out of the people, he would say, "Oh, other people were doing that. I wasn't doing that," And he just spent a lot of time just really not giving a shit, you know, and trying to cover up what he did and try to rationalize what he did. And oh yeah, love them while they're here. What's it matter if they're put like 10 deep in a retort and burned all at once? That's not them anyway. That was his rationale on that whole thing. Oh, his other rationale was, well, when they clean out the retort after they cremate somebody and they get the ashes out, they can never get all the ashes out. So basically, remains are commingled anyway. And that was his way of thinking about it was, well, you don't get all the ashes out. There's always, I'm sure, a little something of the last person in there when you put the new person in. They're going to be commingled no matter what. So you might as well love them while they're here and just don't worry about it if we burn them 10 deep. That was like his overall attitude on it. And it was just like, wow, man. Can't believe that, it's just very, very shocking when that shit comes up. And it's not the only funeral home over the years. I've heard about other funeral homes. I've read probably articles on my main YouTube channel, Crypt. I've had other videos where I've read articles about, there's one in Denver, Colorado that got busted out for giving people cement powder and stuff and, stacking up bodies and not cremating them and taking the money for it. And it's not an everyday occurrence, but it does happen. So it's always important to do your due diligence when you're making the arrangements for yourself or loved ones. Do your homework on the business. Look at the Better Business Bureau. See if there's any complaints against them or anything that they have done that would put a red flag up in your mind like, hey, wait a minute, I don't think I want to deal with these people. I do believe David Sconce's parents got in trouble for siphoning some money out of some perpetual care fund or something like that as well. And I do believe in the documentary, I don't know when it was filmed. It was just released lately on HBO. But the mother, Lori Ann, was still alive, but she declined to be interviewed. But they had shown a picture of her. They kind of crept up to where she was living, and she was sitting out on the porch, and they did a long shot of her sitting on her porch. So I guess she's still alive. Then again, maybe not. Maybe, when they film things, they film it ahead of time too. So who knows when this documentary was actually filmed. But yeah, so the parents were supposedly in trouble for siphoning some perpetual care fund money or something like that out of an account too. Wow. And I remember it was years ago. It was probably the late 90s. Somewhere in the 90s or the early 2000s, I had read a book about this whole thing. That's where I first heard about this scandal. The book was called Chop Shop, and it was all about the Lamb Funeral Home and all about what they did. And when this documentary at HBO came up, I remember thinking, oh yeah, I read the book on this whole thing years ago. The book is old. It was probably like the 90s or early 2000s I read this thing. And it detailed a lot of what the HBO deal detailed too. I had just forgotten a lot of it because it was so long ago that I read this book that I totally forgot about half the shit that they did to people, and to the families and to the deceased and everything. And this David guy was a character, man. He was, about the money. He didn't give a shit how he got it. Somebody get in his way, he'd have them exterminated, solicitation of murder and all that stuff, which he denies. I do believe he was denying it as well. But people who he had been around, this one funeral director who was giving him some problems died of some kind of poisoning or something, and supposedly they had dinner right before this guy died. This guy died of being poisoned or something like that. It was, and then another guy died in another mysterious way as well. And he claims, I had nothing to do with it, blah, blah, blah. But very interesting viewing. If you have HBO, check it out. It's only like 3 episodes. I finished the 3rd episode yesterday, and it was great. So check it out, guys. And, like I said, always, when you're doing any kind of arrangements, always do your due diligence, your homework, to make sure none of these companies have any complaints against them or got in trouble for anything. Very important, and we do place a lot of trust in these people, these companies, to do the right thing. And sometimes that's just not the case, and that's it, Thank you so much for listening to me ramble for over 15 minutes, guys. You guys are the best. Let me know in the comments below. Rate this podcast. Put it in the comments below how this story made you feel. Have you heard about it before? Have you yourself or, family members been a victim of shady funeral industry practices by, unreputable, shady companies? Put it in the comment box below, guys. We'll talk about it. Maybe I'll have, if I get enough people that have had some kind of experience in something like this, maybe if I get enough people on the podcast or to respond, I could get them on as a guest as well, because I'm trying to have my guests come on as well. Me not just, talking about stories that have happened or whatever. I want to actually have, people on that have experienced some of these things, or fellow cemetery YouTube creators, fellow content creators who are cemetery explorers as well. I want to have y'all on here, guys. I'm trying to get a couple of fellow creators lined up for the podcast. I think I have one or two for sure, 2 that I can get on. And we can, start having some conversations and start getting to know some of these people in our community and all that good stuff. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I will be talking to you later with either a guest or another scandal or whatever. All right, guys, peace out.